Today we're diving into the origin and the history of a special weapons and tactics operator on the G.I. Joe team. Nope, not that one. The other guy, Widescope. Larry Kranseler was born in Newton, Massachusetts, right near where I used to live, just outside of Boston, which also happens to be the namesake of Nabisco's Fig Newtons. And no, I'm not sponsored by Nabisco. Widescope debuted at an interesting time in 2003. Hasbro had let some of their trademarks lapse due to non-use, and I'm not so sure that Hasbro knew what they wanted to do with the brand toward the end of the 90s. The name Shockwave, for example, expired, and for a brief time, Shockwave became Shock Blast. That's true on the Transformer side, too. The name Shockwave had been picked up by Lanard Toys for their own G.I. Joe competitor line called The Core. After Transformers Alternators Shock Blast hit retail, Lanard abandoned the trademark and G.I. Joe quickly picked it up again. But that uncertainty and renaming lasted for a few years. That is, until trademarks were reacquired and the modern New Sculpt era began. It was right in this window, just prior to 2003, when plans were set in motion to build G.I. Joe out again. A SWAT guy was planned to be included, but they couldn't use Shockwave's name, so two things happened. The team pushed forward with a very similar looking figure to Shockwave, except now he was codenamed Widescope. Derryl DePriest, who was VP of Global Brand Management at Hasbro for 18 years, starting in 2001, acknowledged that the Widescope sculpt was intended to be Shockwave. But why Widescope? Well, the team who would be working with trademark and copyright law at Hasbro would be the legal department, right? There was one individual who began his career at Hasbro in 1989 as a supervising senior counsel, managing attorney, and became corporate vice president from 2001 to 2010. He, his team, and the legal department had a wide scope of representation for the corporation. This was for all legal services for the global marketing and global development efforts of the toy division's in-house production studio and large deal in licensing. His name was Lawrence Larry Kranseler. Sadly, Larry passed away at 62 years old from a heart attack in 2021. Widescope has had two action figure releases, one in 2003 and one in 2013, right at the 10-year mark when trademarks happened to expire, and that second one was for the figure subscription service, both of which gave him different MOSs. His 2003 Spy Troops Foul card calls out his primary MOS as 11 Bravo, Infantry, with a secondary MOS of Negotiations. His 2013 FSS Foul card lists them as Special Weapons and Tactics, and then Hostage Rescue / Negotiations for his second. If we consider that G.I. Joe is the codename for the Pentagon's Special Counter-Terrorist Group Delta, the most fearsome rapid deployment team of all, per AR Age Issue 1, we might say he went the non-prior service candidate route for the 18X pipeline. That would have required infantry one-station unit training at Fort Moore in Georgia to include both basic and AIT before completing jump school at Fort Liberty in preparation for both Special Forces assessment and selection and then Special Forces qualification course, all with the goal to qualify for the G.I. Joe team. He may have been pulled and diverted along the way for the Joes before getting his 18 series MOS, which means he would have retained his 11 series specialty. Or maybe he was on a Rep 63 contract while working law enforcement. The G.I. Joe team would have pulled him for his SWAT experience. That, mind you, is all speculation. His file cards don't build out that stage of his life and career very much. Per his file card, quote, a special weapons and tactical specialist might seem redundant in a unit as elite as the G.I. Joe team, but not if you consider the degree to which his skills are specialized. If the G.I. Joe team is in an urban situation where there is a locked door behind which there are an unknown number of armed hostile individuals and innocent civilians, it's up to Widescope to kick the door down and go in there first. It's up to him to assess the situation, choose an appropriate course of action, and carry it out, all in the split second between kicking the door down and the firing of the first hostile shot, end quote. His 2013 file card says that Widescope is, quote, an extremely mellow, easygoing type of guy. Widescope never seems to get excited about anything, maintaining a consistent, level attitude through the most disturbing and frightening situations. Once on the way to an assault on a heavily fortified Cobra safe house, when everybody else on the team was keyed up and tense, Widescope fell asleep in the transport. When they woke him, he yawned once, picked up his weapon, and went to do his job. The one thing he's extremely sensitive about is his attack dog, to whom he has bonded intensely. That's a reference to his partner. Widescope came with a partner, his K-9 compadre named Lamont. Lamont is an all-black German Shepherd, common for K-9 units that typically use German Shepherds, Dutch Shepherds, or Belgian Malinois, which is a breed of Belgian Shepherd. Lamont has that perfect 80-20 prey to defense instinct balance. Lamont can operate in high stress, high stimulus, high noise situations. He's good for guard posts, to do walkarounds at the gate, alerting Widescope of anything he detects. He can clear attics, crawl spaces, get through brush quickly, bound up stairwells fast. He can locate suspects with scent, especially in areas where FLIR isn't ideal. In CQB, he can help Widescope clear a room after breaching. If Widescope is in a hide on Overwatch, Lamont can help protect his position. If you're a sniper in enemy territory, especially if you're in a building in an urban or condensed environment, you can hide inside a room to hide muzzle flash, conceal yourself, the works. But as soon as that first round goes downrange, you're immediately going from offense to a defensive position. Helps to have a doggy dude like Lamont guarding your 6. This all makes Widescope fairly unique, where each man on a SWAT team has a very specific role to play in their operations, each requiring the right set of tools. Widescope comes with a range of things that give him a wider scope of duties. He's an operator, sniper observer, negotiator, grenadier, and a breacher. SWAT typically gets called out for high-risk scenarios like high-risk warrants, barricaded subjects, hostage situations, crisis negotiation, VIP protection, civil disorder, active shooters, the things that a terror organization like Cobra and Cobra Command like to conduct. Widescope would be proficient in close quarters combat, particularly with surprise elements, fluidity, economy of motion, and violence of action. Basic CQB can be summed up in 5 pillars that everybody knows. Gain access, make entry, secure the space, move to adjoining spaces, and then command and control. But since he went Army, he'd also be skilled in military operations and urban terrain, or MOUT, as well. He can breach with mechanical devices like a Halligan or sledgehammer or shotgun to the door hinges, or even explosive breaching through doors, walls, and the like. He handles 9-bangers and frags, sweeps past the fatal funnel with his SMG up in firing position, maybe with his gas mask on to not be affected by the CS he just tossed in while checking his angles and putting rounds on target when a tango crosses his crosshairs. Widescope embodies the slow is smooth and smooth is fast doctrine. If he was working with the 2008 G.I. Joe SWAT team, which was Low Light, Shock Blast, new Shockwave, and Long Arm, he could be on Overwatch, ready to snipe through the windows as the team's stacked up, ready to breach. In a team situation, they each have specific actions on entries, corners to clear, angles to check, but if Widescope's going in alone, he'd be having to pie his way through all by himself, with help from Lamont. His experience gives him a wide scope of knowledge, able to neutralize a threat or de-escalate as the situation needs. It's because of that his skill set is neither irrelevant nor redundant to the G.I. Joe team. Police SWAT conducting CQB versus Army CQB have different objectives, both of which are valuable depending on the situation. In his negotiator role, Widescope knows the ins and outs of verbal judo, crisis communication, along with things like rapport building, demonstrating empathy, and active listening. Contain, isolate, negotiate. Contain, isolate, demand, surrender. Flush out with CS or OC gas. Use sharpshooters. Assault a position. Are, in the widest scope of definitions, the options that would be available to him as a negotiator on scene. He'd be trained in mental health awareness and how to talk to someone in acute crisis versus a terrorist or just generally psychotic person. Someone with Stockholm Syndrome would need a different approach than, say, a vet or an elderly person. Some may have crossover, and he'd have to identify that. But that's where he'd be ideally working with the TAC team and the medics. When do you push for surrender versus a more kinetic approach? And more basic things like maintaining your own cool, just like his file card says he excels at. Keeping your emotions in check while trying to influence somebody else's, and other basics like what Danny Roman once said, never say no to a hostage taker. So again, some of this is speculation on my part. When there isn't a lot to go on here, I do my best to weave disparate parts into a singular narrative that makes sense. And because of that, some liberties have to be taken from the real world for that to happen. Widescope showed up in comic book form in Devil's Due Publishing's G.I. Joe issue 26 in 2004. This was at a time when the G.I. Joe team was dealing with the loss of 33 soldiers during the battle against Cobra and the Coil on Cobra Island. Most of the team were sent on leave with just a skeleton crew remaining on base. On the first night, both Widescope and Shockwave were assigned a security team on the evening duty roster. They'd have Lamont with them too, of course. This guy named Scott Sturgis was spying on the Joe's base, so one night a team of Vipers, air quotes around Vipers, infiltrated his home late at night and poisoned him, promising the antidote in exchange for the base's coordinates. Before he could say anything, the SWAT team smashed through the window and Widescope sicked his fur missile on the Vipers. Sort of. Those Vipers were Joes in disguise. They were just there to scare the dude. When Destro was captured and forced to stand before a tribunal for his crimes, he turned the tables on them, promising to deliver Cobra Commander to them instead. Destro was put on an armored transport train heading northwest out of Washington, D.C., under heavily armed guard. Widescope was one of the G.I. Joes to be put on protective detail. On the way, Cobra Commander and the Baroness appeared on the horizon and attacked with an armored column of high-speed sentries, ringnecks, with aerial support from a squadron of flight pods or trouble bubbles. They struck the train and it derailed in a spectacular mess of metal and rubble. But you know what? This was Destro's plan. He knew that Coco would attack. They drew out their adversary to strike. So when Cobra Commander went to attack Hawk, Destro was let go. He was free. And now they had Coco in custody. That was the trade he mentioned to the tribunal. Stalker, Mayday, Widescope, Dial Tone, Duke all started to egress, but sadly, that's when Cobra Commander overpowered Hawk and shot him, paralyzing him in one of the most tragic and dramatic events in G.I. Joe history. Before flying off in a chopper, the Baroness, in another plot twist, shot Cobra Commander in the back, and he hit the dirt, faceplate first. Turns out that the Baroness was also working with her love Destro. Hawk was in a coma for 8 months and paralyzed. This event was a catalyst for the G.I. Joe team, reducing their size back down to 12 core members, so people like Widescope either had to PCS, go to Ready Reserve status, or be fully discharged. In 2003, for the Spy Troops line, Widescope came carded in a 2-pack with a Cobra Battle Android Trooper. And that was the new mold era. His 2013 FSS release, though, used the Pursuit of Cobra Shock Trooper body mold, along with his cover, gas mask radio, a shield, which the Dreadnought Burnout also got in 2003, and 2 weapons to complete his loadout. But curiously, no pistol. One rifle is the Retaliation-era Cobra Commander's submachine gun, and the other is a bolt-action DSR-1 sniper rifle that Blackout used during Spy Troops. That's a rifle used famously by Germany's GSG-9. It's an interesting choice. Boston Police and even FBI HRT frequently use the HS Precision Pro Series 2000 sniper rifle or the ever-classic Remington Model 700. HS Precision usually gets outfitted with a loophole Mark IV scope on a McCann rail. Alright, to sum up Widescope, we turn to a quote on his first file card, which says, "Are you saying my dog has a sissy name? What's so sissy about Lamont? Well, I'm waiting." And with that, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.